Snow fell in a quiet without end, and every flake seemed to carry a memory of breath and steel. Jon stood within it, bareheaded on the bridge that joined King's Tower to the wall, skin prickling with the cold that seeped through wool and mail and leather, as if all that men made were only lies to winter. Below, Castle Black lay in the white hush of late morning. Dark roofs wearing soft mounds, courtyards chalked blank, the forges hushed to embers. The high gate was open a crack only, enough for men to slip in and out with messages and quiet purpose. Beyond that, like a black sail stranded on snow, the king's banner hung stilled, black stag crowned on a field of gold, the heart within it burning. Ewing hung high over the king's camp and faded into the pall of sky like soot taken to air. Ghost padded onto the bridge and pressed his weight against Jon's leg, fur warm, nose cold. The red eyes lifted and met him, as if to ask whether the day would ever end or had, in truth, never begun. "Not yet," Jon said. His breath hung pale. He touched Ghost's ear and felt the wolf's patient attention move with him, as he set his hands on the rimed rail and looked to the far white distances. The world had narrowed to two colors and the innumerable shades winter could place between them, and to a silence that made even thought sound bold. He had not slept. Not truly, not since the hall had filled with smoke and iron, and a man with a voice like a barred door had come to speak of oaths and crowns. The king had a face chiseled from rock that could bear no moss, and eyes that weighed, and a mouth that did not bargain with kindness. He had said Jon Snow's name without disdain or warmth, and the weight of it had been a stone dropped into a winter lake. "He will want an answer," Jon said. Ghost flicked his tail once, a slow flourish, and put his muzzle into the fall of snow, tasting. The wolf sneezed, a feather-soft dismissal of men's matters. The gate creaked, and men in black moved swiftly across the yard with bundled arms and shoulders hunched. A boy ran with them. Slim, eager, a strip of scar along his jaw. That would one day be a story. Jon lifted a hand to stop him, but the boy had already turned to the tower and vanished within. Messages had come before dawn and at dawn and after, as if the day were nothing but a mouth for them to travel through. The next came on wings. He heard the rustle first, an awkward flutter against wind too heavy for thin feathers. The raven found the rail beside him and clung to it with deliberate toes, tilting the black button of an eye up at him while snow glazed its back and melted in the heat hidden beneath its feathers. Its beak opened once, twice, as if to give the world a thought it had changed its mind upon. Then it leaned into Jon's hand when he reached to unfasten the little cylinder tied to its leg. "Hungry old sneak," Jon told it. He found a crumb in his pocket, stale oatcake from a watch, and the raven took it with clean precision, swallowed, and set to ignoring him with furious dignity. The cylinder held parchment, thin and tight, and crackled to crumple under his touch. It smelled of hot iron and pitch, a smell from the king's tents, or any warlord's. He worked it free, broke the unpopular wax, and unfolded it carefully so that the cold would not make it tear like a dry leaf. The seal's impression was the stag and the sword. By his grace Stannis of House Baratheon, first of his name, king of the Andals and the Roe. The letters struck like hoofbeats. Jon did not read the rest at once. He had read it already and heard it spoken. The parchment's words were the shape of a thing already set into the day like a boulder in a field. He looked at them nevertheless, because seeing the shape again might yet teach him where its edges were not. "We do hereby name and declare Jon Snow, known of Winterfell, of sufficient blood and merit, Warden of the North, to hold and defend the said lands and peoples, until such time as a lawful lord of Winterfell be seated, or the crown shall otherwise decree." The script had a thinness to it, like a blade drawn too often on a whetstone. The wax had cooled at a slant. The lines did not waver. The meaning was iron. Snow rubbed the rail thinly. The wind found the space between two stones and sighed, as if the wall itself were a lung too old for breath. He closed the parchment without folding it and slid it back into the cylinder with the same care he had opened it. The raven watched with an untrusting tilt of head, then hopped closer on deliberate feet and scratched once at his glove. "Go on then," Jon said. The bird launched itself into the white, vanished into the drift, and appeared again as a moving black speck, until it was only a memory and another line on a day of too many. He went down the tower steps to heat and smell and voices. Men had gathered in the common room around a pot of cabbage and barley that smelled like a door held open on an old kitchen. The walls sweated a little. A fire had been coaxed to a long, steady line of coal. No one raised his head when Jon went by. They had learned it was easier to let him pass as if he were any other man, and easier for their thoughts too. Ghost followed like a pale shadow. In Maester Aemon's little cell, the stove ticked while it made up its mind to keep burning. Aemon sat wrapped in a gray shawl that had been many things: cloth, blanket, burden, comfort. Sam knelt beside him, feeding a thin twist of kindling into the mouth of the iron creature on the floor, his lip between his teeth, eyes intent as a priest at prayer. Gilly was in the corner, her hands quiet over needle and thread, her boy sleepy at her breast. The air tasted of old books and boiled wool. Sam brightened when Jon came in, and then tried to hide his brightness. "Did he send again?" "A sent," Jon said. He set the cylinder on the old table with its map drawn in stains, and he looked at it as if it might open itself and spare him. "Kings always send," Master Aemon said. Voice dry as thin ice in a shallow stream. "The art is in what comes after." His blind eyes moved a little. He did not reach for the parchment. He did not need to. "Come nearer, Lord Snow." "Not that," Jon said gently. He went anyway, knelt by the old man, and took his hand between both of his. The maester's fingers were parchment in truth, and the skin moved on the bones like paper on twigs. The strength in the hand was still there, in the insistence with which it pressed his. "You have been wearing your silence like a cloak that does not fit," Aemon said. "I have heard you walking in it all night." Jon smiled without any part of him feeling it. "It keeps no warmth." "No cloak does," the old man said, satisfied perhaps to hear the truth named. "Men bring their warmth with them, or they do not." "Tell me what he has done." "He has named me something I cannot be," Jon said, "and told me I must be it, because the realm needs it." "It does," Aemon said, and Gilly lifted her head at that and looked at the old man in surprise. "Do not pout at me, Samwell. I am blind, not a fool. The North is a house whose beams have been left to weather. Stannis Baratheon would put bracing where he can, and he has found a piece of sound timber upon which to nail a brace." "Manday." Sam's mouth worked. "But Jon, he took vows." "We all took vows," Aemon said. "We take them each day we keep to them. Ask him what he will give up, Sam. It will be the measure of his answer." Jon felt the old man's fingers move, a slight tremor that came and went as if the hand were a small boat in a harbor with a storm too far away to see but near enough for waves. "What would you bid me do?" he asked before the tremor could instruct him further in things he already knew. "Bid the day wait," Aemon said. "It will not, but you must make the bid as if you could buy it for a song. Walk the length of your thought. 8. Sleep if sleep will have you. The cold will tell you nothing the warm could not. Stannis Baratheon carries his righteousness like a drawn sword. It cuts him as often as those around him. Davos Seaworth carries the sea. It has smoothed him. Melisandre carries a fire none of us understand. Each will press you. Your oath will press you most. Feel where it presses, and where it is only a word turned to stone by fear. Do not be unkind to your fear. It kept you alive." Mendarsasht. Sam made a small sound. Jon heard how much of himself lived in it. "If you were named Warden," Sam began. "I am named," Jon said. Saying it aloud was like putting a hand to an arrow already lodged in him. It did not make the wound worse, and it did not make it heal. "By royal decree and seal. It changes nothing at Castle Black, Sam. It changes everything beyond it." "That is well said," Aemon murmured. "Will you see the king again?" "He sent for me," Jon said. "I thought to make him send twice." Gilly's needle paused. "Sometimes it is good to make a strong man wait." She said, not looking up. "It teaches him that he is not always the strongest thing in the room." Jon bowed a little to her wisdom and rose. The room seemed warmer now that the question had been allowed to put its feet on the floor and stand there with the rest of them. Ghost turned as he turned, in the easy choreography the wolf had taught him. Sam looked at the stove as if it might have an answer that would not require courage. Aemon's blind face tilted upward and toward the light that the day was not giving. The king's tent had been placed on the firmest ground, where a line of low black trees broke the wind and gave it something to hiss through. The flaps were tied back and a dull red burned within, the light of coals on a day that would have swallowed any other color. 2 guards stood with their hands at their pommels, hoods up, noses rawed at wall. They nodded to Jon and did not move. Inside, the heat carried the smell of pitch, wool, and the lingering sour of many men's breath condensed on leather and canvas. A big map lay unrolled upon a trestle, weighted at the corners with stones dragged from ground where stones did not come easily to hand. Stannis stood behind the map, both hands on the table, as if the lands were a thing he could restrain by grip. Davos Seaworth was to his right, fingerless hand unconcealed, blue eyes habitually taking the measure of what mattered, and kindly choosing to ignore what did not. Melisandre sat on a stool with the demure gravity of a saint carved into cherrywood by a generous knife. The red about her seemed to invent light of its own, and had nothing of warmth in it. "You have not answered," Stannis said without preamble. "I have come to try," Jon said. It was the only truth he had that felt honest enough to bring. "You send ravens faster than I can think. Then think faster," the king said. His eyes came up and met Jon's at a level without pity. "The north rots for want of a man to cut away tainted flesh. Roose Bolton wears my colors. He should be wearing hemp." "Roose Bolton wears nobody's colors," Davos said mildly. He had the knack of offering contradiction like bread rather than stone. "He wears himself. But the king's meaning is plain. Memsai." "I do not lack meaning," Stannis said. "You lack friends," Melisandre said, not unkindly. "Meaning will mend that less swiftly than victory." Jon put his hands behind his back so they would not tell these strangers whether he shook. "Your Grace," he said, and the title had weight. "I am named, as you say, Warden of the North. It was done without my asking and against my oath. Our vows are not trinkets to be swapped or set aside. The realm you swore to defend does not end at your gate," Stannis said. "There is no oath that is not made to something larger than the tongue that spoke it. Yours was made to men who defend the realm. I command you to make that possible." "I cannot be commanded to forswear the night's watch," Jon said. "I have not asked you to," Stannis replied irritably. "I have ordered a thing into being. The North will hear it and measure themselves to it. The watch will continue to watch. You will be a bridge, Snow. I would rather lay 1 stone well than 1,000 badly, and call it a road. Your father knew how to make men trustworthy by trusting them. I am not your father. I will still do the same." Benderu. The knot of that sentence stuck like a fishbone. "Your Grace," Davos said. "He is young. So was I when Robert began to lose," Stannis said. "I was younger when Storm's End starved." Melisandre's eyes rested upon Jon the way fire rested upon wood. It had not decided to eat. "Ghost," she said softly. It startled him. She had not looked down. "He is near." Jon's jaw tightened. "He knows when I've been too long without him," he said. "Yes, if I were a child in need of chiding. He knows when the world has put something strange into you." She said, "It has. The title is not the strangeness. The space it makes in you to receive it is. There are worse emptinesses. The fire told me last night how a man might walk with 2 shadows and not be taken by either." "Then so. Your fires tell you much," Davos said. Something in the way he held his mouth made the remark as careful as a man crossing a stream on shifting stones. "They tell me what I can bear," she said, "and what I must not look directly upon if I wish to remain. This room is full of men who cannot bear what is coming. That is not an insult, Onion Knight. It is a kindness." "Mendarawan Sower." Stannis made a small sound of impatience. "We are not here to praise the future," he said. "Snow." There are houses in the north that will bend if you speak. There are houses that will listen because your father's name shakes their bones at night. There are houses that will plot because their ambition is the only heat that keeps them from freezing. All of them will be thinking more clearly if the word Warden is the first thing they must swallow every morning. I cannot be the one to give them that. I can only be the one who makes it true. I need you to do the rest. Bah. John took a step toward the map and found the world on the parchment undertaken in crude symbols. Mountains like rows of broken teeth, rivers like blue veins, the city of White Harbor a pale scar slightly healed. The Dreadfort was a hooked sigil stabbed into the page. Winterfell was drawn true and unlabeled, and on its little square, a finger had rubbed so often that the darkness had grown to a shine. If I speak, John said, it may be at cross purposes with the Watch. Bowen Marsh has never wanted me to be more than a sword among swords. Bah. Bowen Marsh is whatever Bowens have been for 100 years. Stannis said, he will not be less or more for your sake. You know the words that persuade men like him, that obedience is protection, that time is a form of valor. Say them to him while you do what is needed elsewhere. Do you mean to appoint a man to command in my stead? John asked. I mean to let you see that a command is not a chair, Stannis said sharply. You are not a king who must be seen by his throne to be believed. Davos made a small motion that drew John's eye. There's a thought you are not speaking, the smuggler said. It is polite to one thing and impolite to another. John exhaled slowly. My sister, he said. If she lives, if any of them live. Sansa, Arya. Their names were a softness inside his mouth that made him ache. If she is in Winterfell, if a Bolton holds her, if a Frey. He did not finish any of it. The words were a rotten ladder. Stannis' face did not change. That was its way of changing. If one of your blood is within my enemy's walls, I will count that among the reasons to tear down those walls, he said. I will not barter that by asking you to withdraw from a black cloak into a warden's cloak, as if they were two the same. I know the difference. I am not blind, though some say I am. Melisandre stood with a softness that did not belong to any ordinary woman, and came to the map like a flame deciding to look closer at what it would take in. I saw a girl with a needle in her hand and water on her breath, she said, very simple like a child reporting a thing too complete to need interpretation. I saw a girl with hair like river clay and eyes like winter pools, and she was too far from Winterfell for its stones to know her. Your other sister, I did not see. I saw a woman with hair the color of a new coin who had learned to move without the sound that betrays gentleness. That is a craft others never learn. She wore a smile like a blade's back. Davos scratched at his beard, discomfort written in the motion. You will forgive us if we do not make war by poetry, he said. It was not poetry, Melisandre replied. It was how a thing looked when it was not yet willing to be itself. John swallowed. The room shifted and steadied. If Arya breathed beyond reach, that was a little warmth like a spark in wool. If Sansa had learned to move in quiet, he could not think that thought without seeing her laugh years ago in a yard made of sunlight and wood, and he could not bear the comparison, so he did not make it. He stood with the winter map and the winter smell, and the king's eyes on him, and let the ache be named without being fed. What do you require of me now? He said at last. That I can give without breaking the thing that I am. Stannis considered the line of river that dribbled blue south from the wall, as if it had offended him. Right, he said. Speak to those who will not read. Send men whom men trust to carry your breath to them. I will supply riders, parchment, seal. I will supply the decrees twin to any lord who requires theatrics. Tell them the Warden of the North expects their answer before the new moon. Tell them the king will march whether they answer or not. Tell them a Bolton is no shield to hide behind, and no table one can dine at without becoming meat. Then, there are men at Carhold who will answer like friends to a king they mean to betray, Davos said. I could name you one whose smile will never reach his eyes unless he has stolen something from you. If the boy at Carhold lives, he will not be the problem. His uncle will. Name him. Stannis said. Arnulf, Davos said. Sour around the edges like milk a day past good. He will speak you fair and count the coins he means to spend on your coffin. If you give him a torch to carry, do not turn your back to see it. He will use it to light another man's fire. Stannis' mouth thinned into a blade. I know Arnulf, he said. I have eyes in the dark as well as I have in the light. Snow will write to all of them. I will write to those who require my hand's weight to know the measure. Melisandre dipped a finger into a small bowl of ash on the trestle edge and drew 3 lines on the map with slow greed, one curving north along the coast, one cutting through forest to the Dreadfort, one trailing the king's banner south in a line of heat. And I, she said, will sleep with the fire and persuade it to speak in sentences rather than fragments. Jon nodded. He felt a strange relief to have been asked for work he understood. The pen was a kind of sword. A seal could be a door. He could write to Wyman Manderley with the memory of roasted oxen and fat laughter in his mind, and try to wake the part of the man that had always been too alive to sit long in obedience. He could write to Lord Serwyn, to Lady Dustin, if she cared to read a thing not made in her own mirror. He could even write to the hill clans, Dagmar and Wool and Nari, who did not respect letters but respected the breath of the man who sent a letter if his breath had once been seen to not break in wind. He could write to a world he had left and that had never quite let him go. And if the watch says no? Jon asked quietly, because that question had been sitting in the room like a soldier no one wished to salute. If Marsh goes to the softest way of having it, and Yarwick shrugs, and Slint smiles, and they say, this letter is not yours to write, Davos answered before the king, then you find the way of having it where no one's pride is asked to die first, he said. Let the letter be from the king's hand to their ear, and yours to the north. Let your scribe be a man no one suspects of a mind. Pip, Gren, someone who believes ink is a task with an end. You must not force men into corners unless you are ready to keep them there without resentment. I learned that in holds and on decks. Now, Stannis grunted. Which might have been agreement, contempt, or the sound a stubborn truth makes, when it can be neither chewed nor spit. Do it, he said to Jon. If you are so cautious that you make yourself a hindrance, I will cut you out of my way. If you are so bold that you break my plan by taking the step I have not yet placed my foot upon, I will cut you out of my way. There is a path between those two that a man can walk if he is not in love with either end. Down. Jon bowed. Your Grace, he said. The word did not become easier to say. It did become easier to mean. He turned and left the tent before the smell of pitch could teach him to hate it. The day had not moved in the sky while he was within. Snow still rendered every sound in a handful of iron filings. Ghost waited where he had left him, leaving a white hollow in the white drift and watching the door with the patience of a good blade. Jon set his hand to the wolf's throat and felt the steady run of life. He did not speak. There were words to spare, and he would spare them. He wrote until his hand cramped and his breath rose in the cold like a flock of birds, startled and made to scatter and return. Scatter and return. Parchment grew into piles with modesty, and then those piles were sealed with the stag and sword and the old cracked ring, with its dire wolf Jon had found in a chest that had once belonged to a man who taught boys to stand up when they would rather sit. Letters to the Manderleys were different from letters to the Umbers. The hill clans would be asked as neighbors. Lady Dustin would be teased, as if by a son of men who were not afraid of her. To the Glovers he wrote of loss and hands hard at work. To little Lord Serwyn he wrote as if a brother were speaking of a road he had walked. To the Karstarks he did not write what he thought. He built a bridge made of stone that might look like ice. He asked Sam to read them once each, and Sam's slow mouth added a word here and there like a carpenter tapping in a peg where a beam might loosen. When night came, it came without ceremony, as if it had been standing in the corner and had only just been noticed. Torches made small islands of stubborn light. Men's laughter rose in brief bursts like sparks that went nowhere. Ghost left him once and returned with the smell of blood on his muzzle. That was rabbit blood, and not a man's. Jon fed him from the plate he did not finish. He slept at last, because his body insisted, and when sleep came, it was the kind that does not consent to meaning. He dreamt of hard snow that broke like glass underfoot, and of a hall where the rafters were made of pines that had been young when the first men were old. And when he woke, he had the taste of smoke and pine in his mouth, and the memory of a voice calling his name that belonged to a man both dead and alive, and to no man at all. Morning was less a new thing than the same thing again. The ravens took to air with their cargo of lines and seals, and came back lighter. Riders left with leather hoods down and scarves up, breath coming hard and regular as rowers. Bowen Marsh found John with the second cup of broth at his lips, and nodded to him, as if to say they were divided by something not worth the effort of a fence, and then turned away as if to build one anyway. Othel Yarwick talked to a wall as if it might move if he described its own making to it. Janos Slint smiled with his small teeth at no one and ate too much butter. In the godswood by the wall, where trees did not belong, and yet somehow did, John stood at the pool and watched the red leaves hold snow, the way a child holds secrets, carelessly and with delight. The face in the weirwood looked down without malice or approval. He asked it nothing, and told it nothing. He stood there until he felt much smaller and much steadier, and when he left, he did so with no sound. The first answer came not from White Harbor or Last Hearth, or even from a man. It came at noon with a rider whose horse's lungs were thick, and whose eyes had that overbrightness animals get when they have been asked for more than they had, and given more than they should. The rider slid from the saddle before the horse had decided to stop, and staggered into the yard with a letter bound in pink wax. It looked like a tongue torn from a mouth and pressed back into shape by hands that did not understand an apology. From Winterfell, the rider rasped, dropping to one knee as if the yard had reached up and pulled him down. Red. Men gathered because the day had been waiting to give them something other than itself. John broke the ugly wax with thumb and forefinger and smelled what it had been pressed upon to cool. Pigs. Grease. Smoke from fires that had been put to work on meat as much as on warmth. The words were large and certain, and had been written by a hand fighting with its desire to be larger and more certain still. Bastard, the letter began, and the flake that fell onto the page in that moment melted and ran as if tears could live in that cold at last. John read on, and the world came closer. The words boasted. They named. They lied, and because of that, perhaps told truths even they did not know how to carry without spilling. When he was done, his hand did not shake. The yard had gone so quiet that he could hear someone far away drop a ladle and swear softly to no one that it had been an accident. Stannis' men were already moving, as if they had been waiting not for the content, but for the shape of a day with events in it. John folded the letter and slid it into his belt as if it were a knife he might use later. He looked across the yard, and for a moment saw Winterfell in the middle of it, pale and perfect and impossible. Then it was gone. "Your Grace," he said when Stannis came with his impatience tucked into him like a blade in a boot. "We have been offered an invitation, in terms that pretend to be a threat." Stannis held out his hand. John did not give him the letter. He met the king's eyes and said, "It is mine to answer first." Davos' mouth softened in what might have been relief, or the acceptance a sailor gives a storm he has recognized as one he can survive. Melisandre looked pleased in a way that did not include happiness. Ghost leaned his weight against John's knee, as if to test whether the man could bear what the wolf already had. Snow fell. The day was a door opening. Yeah. The answer he gave at first was not words. He went to the rookery and stood with the smell of old straw and fresher droppings and the low thunder of wings, and let the ravens eye him with their greedy intelligence as if he owed them debts he did not remember incurring. Clydas shuffled in his careful way, the iron keys at his belt, making a small continual speech of themselves, and held out a tray with quills and sand and a pot of ink as black as a shut pupil. The little stove glowed with resentful heat. John sat at the table where boys had scratched names long worn to ghosts and laid out the pink-sealed letter. He did not read it again. Letters like that did not become less themselves when read twice. They only put out more smoke. He drew a new sheet and felt the slight rough of it under his palm. He let the quill rest in his fingers until the impulse to hurry ran itself out like a dog that has to race once around the yard before it will lie down. Bastard. The letter had begun, as if a stain were a man. Joan's reply did not begin with any name at all. He wrote of winter, and of roads, and of the king's decree, not as a boast, but as a shape in the world, to be stepped around or over. And he wrote of the north as a thing too long treated, as a great patient, expected to rouse on its own if given enough time. He kept his hand steady and did not give the letter the pleasure of anger. He named himself only at the end, with the old ring pressed in wax beside the stag and sword. Jon Snow, by the king's writ named Warden of the North, sworn of the Night's Watch at the wall. The words lay there, impossibilities beside necessities, and he looked at them until they no longer seemed to fight with one another like dogs held too close. He sanded, shook, sealed. The wax took the impression cleanly. A second letter followed, and a third, and 20 more. He had written already to the north as a man writes to kin held by a long winter indoors. Now he wrote to those who had sent nothing, and to those whose answers would be too sweet. To White Harbor, he sent a letter that did not chide. It asked with a memory in it, of heavy tables, and the smell of roasting meats, and the laugh of a man whose girth had seemed a kind of generosity in itself, though Jon knew better than to mistake appetite for kindness. To Last Hearth he wrote in plain lines, like fence rails hammered into frozen ground, naming old hunts and the way umbers had always carried the forest in their breath, as if it were a thing they had swallowed once and never fully breathed out again. To Lady Dustin he sent words with a little bite in them, not insult, but something like the sharpness that wakes a sleeper, who would be better served by waking than by the warmth of blankets. To the Kerwins, the tall hearts if any remained with hands to open a letter, to Deepwood by rumor, to Oldcastle, to Serwyn, he let each letter sit on the table like a separate thought, and did not let any of them borrow colors from another. The one he did not write was to Carhold. He drafted it twice nevertheless, and both times the words made a ladder he did not trust. Arnulf was a name Davos had spoken with the same careful disgust a cook reserves for meat, gone just at the edge of sour. Harrion Karstark's face came to him, the boy who had once ridden among Robb Stark's host, a boy whose last sight of his father had been a blade falling at Robb's word. That wound had a way of bleeding again when the air turned. Jon set the half-letter aside and put a small stone upon it, a little cairn to mark something dead that still had business with the living. He had only just lifted his head when Bowen Marsh darkened the doorway with his set of soft bulk, and pinched mouth, and a snow-clotted cloak thrown over his shoulders, as if he loved it no better than he had to. Bowen's cheeks were red from the cold, and his eyes redder from their habit. He made a little show of wiping his boots upon the rag, and brought the smell of snow and salt meat with him. "You have opened a door," Bowen said without preface, "and the wind is coming through it." Jon held his place with a finger on the edge of a page and did not rise. "The door was opened when the king made camp below our walls," he replied. "The wind only realized it today." Bowen looked at the pink seal on the edge of the table as if it were a rash. "We should have no part in their letters," he said. "We should have less part in their wars. I am the sword in the darkness, that is what we told the gods. There is no darkness in a lord's hall but what men bring with them." "You are not wrong," Jon said. He surprised himself by saying it without heat. "There is also no light at this wall, but what men bring with them. The realm is what we swore to protect. There's no clause that says, unless the realm is south of your pride." "I take no pride in any of this," Bowen said stiffly. "I take only care. If we are seen to put our hands to a king's cause." "We have been seen," Jon said. He gestured at the window where snow washed the light thin. "Every man with eyes can see it. Riders go from the king's camp. Riders come to us. We feed them, and they feed us. His men stand our watches when our men fall sick. They claim we watch the wall, and he watches the north. The claim is a plank over a pit. It holds so long as no one stomps on it. The Bolton letter has begun the stomping." "Ben?" Bowen's lips tightened as if he had bitten something. "You speak like a man in a hall? You are not that. You are Lord Commander." "Hold to it. I am not Lord Commander," Jon said quietly. The words surprised him with the sorrow in them. "The election stands undone. Marsh, if you are to chastise me, do it with the truth in your mouth." Bowen blinked, and in that blink Jon saw the man wavering between reflex and honesty. Bowen said at last. "The choosing is yet to be had, because the king came among us with his banners and made our words contingent on his grace. You have acted a commander without the cloak. It will anger men who wish to have something concrete to love or hate." "It has angered me," Jon said. "I do not sleep with dreams that leave me kinder. I am weary of the shape of this day. But, Bowen, if I take the cloak, you will accuse me of being the king's creature. If I do not, others accuse me of using not clothing to do whatever I wish without answer. There is no road through this that is not made of rocks. Choose which you'd have me hobble on." "Ben, you asked me to choose a rash," Bowen said. "I ask you to choose a wound that heals," Jon replied. "I will not take food from the stores to feed Stannis' men. I will not give our timber for his siege engines. I will not order a man of the Watch south for any cause that is not the Watch. So I will still write to men I was once a boy among, and remind them that the realm includes them and that winter has teeth." Bowen's gaze moved around the room as if it might find reinforcements there. It found only ravens. "And if the swords in that realm come north to look us in the teeth, then we will show them ours," Jon said. He did not raise his voice. "And the king's men will stand beside us for their own sake. And if they do not, I will know him better than I do today." Bowen's breath went out of him. He rubbed a palm over his jaw as if to remind himself of its existence. "You are young," he said, which he meant as a complaint and as a prayer. "Your father was judged a just man. He made many uncompromising decisions. Some of them cost him," Jon said. "Some of them kept the North upright until men thought it needed no keeping. We are living inside the sum of those." Bowen made the softest of snorts. "A man thinks better after stew," he said grudgingly, as if rescued by the change. "Do not send letters that cannot be taken back on an empty stomach. I will not have Clydas told I stood in your way. I stood in your room, and then I left it." When he had gone, the rookery felt warmer for having had disagreement rub at it. Ghost nosed the door and came in without asking anyone's opinion. Shook snow from his fur in a rush that left Clydas muttering, and lay with his chin on Jon's boot. The weight and anchor. An insistence that some living things would be simple, even if men refused to be. He wrote one more letter that afternoon, the hardest. It was to a man already dead. He had never learned to pray in any way that did not feel like talking to himself in a room where the walls had ears and no tongue. He did not write it to be sent by Raven. He wrote it because words that stayed in his chest had begun to feel like a kind of rot. He wrote, "Father," and paused there, hearing the old correction as if it still mattered. "Lord Father, my lord." No, not father at all. And then writing anyway what his hand had set itself to write. "I am asked to be a thing you would have refused for my sake. I am asked to be a thing I think you would have wished on me if it were just, and perhaps wished on me, even if it were not. I am asked to be me, and not me. I cannot ask you. I am making of myself a man who will have to answer to a look in the mirror that belongs to you, and to no man else." He folded that letter twice, not for any seal, and tucked it into the breast of his jerkin where it could be a thin discomfort and a thin warmth by turns. Snow makes everything that happens in it seem someone else's story for a time. The day grew by accretion, sentries coming off the wall with beards laced in ice and giving their brief nods. Melisandre passing like a red word men are reluctant to say without the king to give it excuse. Davos Seaworth laughing once by the kitchen tents and saying something to a boy that made the boy stand up taller. The king himself moving from map to men to horses to map again, as if motion could produce heat if one refused to pause long, you knew it. Near dusk, there was a commotion at the outer gate. A horn blew once, not alarm, but the sound a man gives when what he sees is not quite what he expected. Jon was on the yard before he'd thought to go there, shoulder brushing Ghost's flank, boots finding their surety on surfaces that would have taken another man down. A small party had come out of the white, like chips of darker color in milk. They were bundled high, faces hooded and masked to the eyes. horses grim with hoarfrost. The foremost pulled down her scarf and threw back her hood with the impatience of someone long used to being too hot even in cold places. Her hair was black and tangled with ice. Her face was narrow and fox-bright, and her mouth made lines that did not match any of the smiles she had learned to use. She looked like a girl doing a very good impersonation of a woman no one should push. "I am Alys Karstark," she said before anyone could ask, voice raw from cold and from disuse of gentleness. "I seek the protection of the Night's Watch." The name went through the yard like wind through bare branches. Men looked at Jon, and then looked at the king, because men will always look at the thing that can hurt them sooner. Stannis' mouth carved itself sharper. Davos' eyes softened as if he had found a new problem he already liked more than most. Ghost took one slow step, nose tasting her smell, and the girl's eyes went wide without fear. Only recognition of a thing that had suddenly turned the day from words to myth. "You have a dire wolf," she breathed. And there was a child in the words. "You have all the old stories in your yard." "I have a cold yard," Jon said. "Come in out of it. Your horse will be seen to." "How many?" "Now, 6. she said. And only then did her chin dip with the weight she'd fought off at the gate. "2. Who cannot ride again today. My uncle Arnulf would have given me to his son to shove me aside from the carhold he plans to steal. He spoke sweetly the night before and sent men with me the morning after. The men you see are those who chose not to be bought." "Clever men," Davos said under his breath. Alys's eyes went to him and flicked away again like a bird that cannot afford to stay. "You are the smuggler who became a lord," she said, not unkindly. "Only inventory. My father spoke of you. He had a list of men he disliked who still made him hopeful about other men." "Your father and I would have shared more than lists," Davos said gently. "I knew Lord Rickard little enough. I know the sort of wound a beheading leaves in a house." Alys's jaw worked once and steadied. She looked at Jon and saw perhaps a place where she could lean if she let herself. She did not lean. "I seek the watch," she repeated, as if this were a ritual, and she had only so much breath for additions. "You shall have it," Jon said. He did not look to Bowen. He did not look to Stannis. Protection was not a thing a man asked permission to give against men like Arnulf Karstark. It was the thing he did without waiting for his better self to write a letter about it. They gave the 2 worst of her company to the care of the healers. They put Alys by a fire and set her hands to a wooden bowl full of warmth. She sat stiffly with her shoulders as square as a man's, and only then allowed the shaking to begin in the smallest muscles of her face and hands, as if she were ashamed to be capable of trembling at all. Melisandre came to the edge of the circle of warmth and stood there with a look that was almost sympathetic and therefore off balance. "I saw you," she said. "Once, twice. You ran under a sky that refused to stay still. You ran where a river's breath could still be felt under ice. A man came behind you with meat on his breath and a word in his mouth like wife and like sheep. I did not like his face." "I do not like it either," Alys said shortly. Her glance at the red woman had little use in it and less fear. "If you saw me, you did not call men to stop what you saw. That is something I like less." "Many. The fire is not a horn," Melisandre replied. "It is a thing that shows and does not shout. We have men enough for that." Alys's eyes cut to Jon again as if to say the fire's lack was none of her concern. "If you will not let me be taken back, it will make of me a debt you will have to hold. I have nothing to pay with but my name." "Names are coin enough among men who remember their own," Jon said. "Your name is Alys Karstark. You are not a sheep. You will not be married to a man like a sow to a boar to make a ledger agree with itself. That is as certain as the wall." "Oh." Stannis came then, measuring rather than looming. "So the carrion at Carhold sends men north to play honor like a board game," he said. "They will find that in my halls the rules change." "Your Grace," Alys said. She did not kneel. She had the look of a girl who had decided which part of her would refuse and was ready to accept all of the beating the decision would buy. My uncle keeps a small king in his own head. It bows to no other. Stannis' mouth made the slightest lift at one corner, which for him was laughter. I have met men like that, he said. They ruin their own appetites at their first meal and still insist on dessert. Davos shifted so that his warmth came into the girl's left side at the distance that men take with strangers when those strangers should, for their sake, be less strange sooner. You are safe here, Davos said in the tone that made men believe they might be, even when circumstances had not changed. If there is a price to be paid for it, we will haggle over it in daylight with bread on the table, not in a dark lane with knives out. Later, when the noise had thinned and Alice had eaten and been seen to a pallet in a place where 4 women would sleep near her without letting her be alone with her thoughts, Jon stood at the inner gate and let his breath cool his own mouth. He had not thought to have a Karstark under his roof and a Bolton letter under his belt on the same day. The world had a way of giving coin in handfuls, mixed with ashes. You are already doing the thing the title asks of you, Davos said at his shoulder, not accusing and not praising. You do not require it to make you act. That is why Stannis chose you. Not because he has a fondness for bastards or for the wolf scat. I do not require the title to make men here despise me either, Jon said. The humor was there only as a thin plank over water. Bowen thinks I am making a hall inside the Watch and inviting lords to it. You are making a hall inside yourself, Davos said. You have to decide what it is like to walk there. Men who visit you will take on the gate you use. Jon watched his own breath. The air found his chest and left it less than it had entered. He advised I write steadier letters upon a full stomach, he said. He is not wrong. The Onion Knight always advises food first. Davos said with something like pride. I have kept many men alive with a loaf at the right moment. Starvation colors judgment like a cheap dye. It can be rinsed out if you are swift. Wait too long and it is part of the cloth. Jon did not sleep early. He walked the wall while the world below sank into a soft anonymity, and the stars pricked through the fraying white above. The others on watch took his presence as men take weather, putting their heads down a little, setting their feet more carefully, finding yet another subject to pretend to be interested in. Dolorous Ed was there, his nose redder than usual, his voice its habitual embrace of catastrophe, as a friend men should not trust. If it goes wrong, Ed said, not turning his head, at least it will be wrong in new ways. I'm tired of last year's wrong. It's like a soup boiled too long. Dender. It may yet be the same soup, Jon said. Stirred. And stirred harder by a king with a big spoon, Ed said. I never thought to see Stannis Baratheon at our table. I never thought to see any king but the one that wears blue lights, if truth be plain. Men south have their quarrels. I'd as soon eat my boot as be in a room when one nobleman asks another whether he's wearing the right hat. I have no hat, Jon said. You've several, Ed replied. We just can't see them because snow's on them. He sniffed. And the sniff was a complaint addressed to the universe at large. I used to think the worst thing about the cold was how it makes your prick shy as a mouse. That was before I learned there's always a colder cold. Now I think the worst thing about the cold is remembering you didn't die in the last one and have to do this again. Jon laughed, the sound torn away before it belonged to him. Sleep when you can, he said. Eat when you can. That is what keeps a man from making mistakes he learns to call fate. NMD. Ed's eyes went to Ghost, and then back. You have a great white dog who never starves and never freezes, he said with mock resentment. That's a kind of hat, too. He thinks he's a man and he's not wrong. I think I'm a man and I have my doubts. Night, Lord something. Good night, Jon said, and stood again at the height where the world was simple in its white wickedness. If he had been the sort of man who could make of the cold a religion, he might have done it then and been content. As it was, he kept a small fire alive in his chest and fed it with names. In the morning the king announced a thing in the way he did everything, as if it had already been done and the men around him had merely caught up to it with their ears. He would march within 5 days. He would take the road that was hardly a road through forest and across open waste, where men who were not careful became words instead of bodies. He would send riders to Carhold with letters that weighed like stones. He would send a smaller fork of his force to Deepwood Motte to take it from the Ironborn who sat there like ruddy spiders in a northern room. He would leave a garrison at the wall to make sure that its claims to watch the true enemy did not become an excuse to avoid peeves and pains. "You will not do as you please in my absence," Stannis said to Jon. "You will do as you must. These are different men. I cannot decide which I dislike more." "You need not like either," Davos said. "If a man never liked a choice he had to make, he would still have to make it. That is the unifying principle of this world." And Melisandre spoke of fires along the way, and of trees with eyes, and of hills whose rock had eaten men before, and would be pleased to have the taste again. Her voice had austerity to it that made men more serious simply by hearing it, which was perhaps its only true use. When she spoke of the snows beyond Long Lake, Jon looked down at the little map he had drawn for himself, and quietly redrew one line. A curve eased here, a rise taken there. He had no desire to seem a man questioning prophecies, but he found he had less desire to see good men bogged in a hollow 100 yards from safety, because they had believed that the ground would rise where a priestess had imagined it would. The first of the answers from the north began to come back. From White Harbor there came no letter at all, and then, after days enough to make Davos' eyebrows live in suspicion, a small hamper wrapped in sailcloth and tied with ropes good enough to be used again. It held a loaf dense with nuts and dried berries and a small wheel of cheese and a single large onion, round as a head. At the bottom lay a square of parchment with writing barely enough to justify its own existence. "To the Warden by writ. 8. W.M. Davos held the onion in both hands, as if it were an old friend. "He has a sense of humor," he said with real appreciation. "I mislike men who are funny and wicked. They are too efficient. But the ones who are funny and honorable are rare enough to make a season by their mere appearance. Now." To this Jon sent quiet thanks, and a line that said no more than it needed, and a promise unspoken that when he went to White Harbor, it would not be to tell the man there that his humor had misled him. From Last Hearth there came a letter written with a fist, the words as big as the man who had penned them. It spoke of axes that had not yet forgotten how to swing, and of a nephew in a castle who could not hold his piss when winter wind blew under the doors if he had had mead the day before. It spoke of Jon's father with a lack of poetry that was its own kind of respect. It called him Snow and Warden in the very same breath, as if to test the fit of both. And then it promised 20 men and more when the Snows gave a little and an oath to bring twice as many mouths as axes wherever he went, because it was a shame to let a king starve when he could be eating your food instead of his own rations. "Umbers," Davos said fondly. "They make of life a thing to be chewed. They have no understanding of nibbling. It is refreshing and exhausting." Then, from Baratheon, there was a silence that was not empty. It was the silence of a woman counting her breath, and her horses, and her grudges. Lady Dustin's hand appeared at last with a word that could be read as courtesy, or as a carefully offered slight, depending on the angle of the light. She would not write Warden. She wrote, "The king's right hand in the north," and pretended it was the same thing. She invited him to remember that bones were a truth land could not be forced to forget no matter who sat upon it. She invited him to call upon her on his way south, if he required shelter, and had not been foolish enough to burn any of the bridges he would need afterward. Jon rode back with his face set still and sent the seal with the direwolf pressed deep enough for the wax to hurt under a thumb. To Serwyn came acceptance that felt like flint striking steel. To Oldcastle came questions about the harvest's possible yield, which meant they were feeding the king without saying it. To Carhold there came a letter at last, after Alice sat with him, and bit the inside of her cheek until a little bead of red showed and dried, and said the name she did not want to say aloud. Arnulf Cregan, and told him in small words which men would be watching the roads, and which would be tempted to answer if the king's letters came with meat on the cart, as well as promises. He sent them both ways, by different riders. One went with the king's hand visible on its face. The other went with none but Jon's and a list of names at the bottom of a separate page that said, "Give this to these men and not to any other. And if you are stopped, do not swallow it, because the man who stops you will know the trick and cut your belly to have his tidbit anyway." at the hall that had once been Mance Raiders and then Stannis, and now belonged to the weather more than to any man. Melisandre had a brazier that she fed like a pet. She sat before it in the hour before dawn, and in the last hour before night, when day and night were both uncertain which they were. Jon went to her one evening because the thought of not knowing what she would say the next day was worse than the thought of hearing it. "You do not come for your future," she said. "Eyes in the embers, not him. I come to understand how you look into a fire and find words and are not burned for the presumption," he said. He sat without being asked, because there were things in this world that became easier if one pretended to comfort with one's body, even when the mind did not have it to give. The heat prinkled his face until it seemed to have its own pulse. "I am burned," she said. "You mistake me by thinking I am not. There is no looking into a thing that wants to be a god and coming away unscarred. The trick is to love your scars before they demand it. Men who hate their scars have them eaten from the inside." He watched the charcoal collapse in upon itself like a city letting down its gates. "You saw Alice," he said. "You spoke words about Arya, about Sansa. If I ask you what you see if you look for my name, will you see a word or a man? I will see a man who is not finished," she said. "Men hate to be unfinished. It makes them feel like bread left in a cooling oven, soft in the middle and prone to fall. The God I serve has no patience for half-made things, but people are never finished. That is why he is always angry." Her eyes turned to him then, a slow motion like a door swinging after long disuse. "You think I do not know that names are not enough. But I know the weight of them. Jon Snow is a weight, Warden is another. People bend under weights if no one teaches them to lift with their legs. I do not know how to lighten myself," Jon said. "I know only how to add and then carry. Then learn something new," she said. "If you refuse to learn, I will tire of carrying you in my eyes. You think you do not ask me for anything when you come here. You ask me to take more of you into myself, so that it will not crowd you. It is no small thing. It is like taking a coal into the mouth and keeping it there." "I did not mean to ask that," Jon said, and his shame surprised him like a gust. "I have too many asks of men I did not mean. I will leave you alone. You may keep your mouth closed." She smiled without softness. "Do not leave me alone," she said, and the words had so much honesty in them that he started. "Men who avoid me become legends in their own minds about how pure they are. Men who stand near me find they have less room to lie to themselves. It is good for them. Stay. Learn the shapes in the coals for what they are. Shapes. They are not roads. They are not commands. They are a story the fire tells itself because it is lonely." Then shall. They sat until the coals had gone to red eyes in a dark beast's face, and then Jon made himself leave, because if he did not he would begin to think that comfort could be had by proximity to heat alone. That was where men froze to death. At the edge of warmth they had mistaken for the thing itself. The pink letter's answer went south with a rider who had once hunted in the wolf's wood, and whose cheeks had so little flesh that the cold had made maps upon them. Jon chose him because he had a way of entering and leaving a thought without dragging it along with him to the next thing. "You will not be followed," Jon said. "If you are, lose them. If you are cornered, throw the letter into water and let it become a shape someone tells another man they saw. Do not let it be a thing they can weigh. If you can put it into the bastard's own hand, do it. If not, put it into a steward's hand with a look that tells him he is better than his master. The look costs you nothing and buys much." The man nodded once. He was not the sort to speak of bargains out loud. He vanished as men vanish when the world refuses to be interested in them. Stannis camp began to change shape the way snowbanks do, under a day that has decided to be a little warmer than yesterday. Tents became bundles. Sledges grew out of piles of nothing. Men stood around ropes with hands on hips, thinking, then bent as one and made the thinking manifest. The sound of curses arose and kept its own steady weather. He met with the king again in the last light before the lamps were lit. The map had accumulated more weight. Small stones that meant things no one would remember in a year. Little knives stuck into an edge where someone needed the satisfaction of violence without the bother of its consequences. I leave you the wall with its men, its old men, its boys, its fools, Stannis said. I will take with me the ones who came to me to be given something to do. If they fail, they can hate me for giving them the wrong thing to do. If they succeed, they can hate me for needing their success. Either way, they will go south with their talking. Your silence is more useful here. Then the winds. You do not leave me the quiet, Jon said. I do not believe in quiet, Stannis said. It is a lie men tell themselves to avoid naming the noise inside their heads. You will have the noise, and if it becomes music I will be surprised, and then pleased, and I may even say so where others can hear. Do not require it of me. Davos had a folded scrap he worried with his thumb like a man with a tooth in want of pulling. He gave it to Jon when the king had gone to inspect the iron points of pikes that would become hands where hands became useless from coal. It was a map of the stretch of land between the last river and the White Knife. A piece of it he had drawn himself, badly. He had marked in a different ink a patch of low ground that a man could mistake for sound if he came upon it with his mind on other things. There's a place here, Davos said. It looks like it drank the world once and liked the taste. If snow covers it right, it looks like a thing you could run a cart over. Don't let anyone run a cart over it. You'll lose the ox and then 2 men and then an hour and then your temper and then a day making it back to where you should have been to start. Then Jon took the map because taking the map was taking the man's care into his pocket. You are going to White Harbor if the king has any sense, he said quietly. You have the air of a man taking leave of a room he is fond of. Davos' mouth did its brief thing again. Bending like a cat's ear pricks. I am a messenger you cannot send by raven, he said. Wyman Manderley has meat. He prefers to eat it with story. I tell stories in a way he might not spit out. If I do not come back, I will have died of satire at his table. Tell Stannis it was the onion that killed me. He likes a tale with logic and with a lesson about how cleverness has a price. Jon wanted, all at once, and with an irrational heat that embarrassed him, to say, do not go. He did not. If you do not come back, I will assume you have found a way to be useful where you are. That is the nicest epitaph I can imagine, Davos said happily. May no one carve it yet. He held out his left hand, the one without fingers, not as a jest and not to demand pity, but exactly as a man holds a thing he has, and offers it as the only coin he can give that will not bounce. Jon took it. The heat of it startled him. He had expected it to be colder than any man's. The morning the king rode, the air had a brittle reassurance in it, as if winter itself had decided to hold still long enough to allow men their pageants. Banners called themselves to attention, and then lay down again as if remembering themselves. Horses blew white braggadocio and pawed. Men sang, badly. The line that moved away from the wall, like a dark snake many-headed, made its own meaning on the white. Jon watched until he could not tell one ant from another. Ghost sat, ears forward, as if to say he knew that some part of Jon went with that line, and that it was a part he had decided he would keep. When the last sledge had creaked, when the last curse had been spent and replaced by men's silence that covers fear and fatigue without admitting either, the wall felt larger and smaller both. The absence of a king is a presence for a while. Then it becomes an absence again. The camp left behind was not trivial. It was a portion of heat and habit and a handful of men easier to like than to respect, and a handful easier to respect than to like. They settled their weight differently now that they did not have to please one man's thin patience. Elise Karstark did not hide. She learned the names of the men who guarded the inner gate, and of the women who put round loaves upon the boards, and of the boys whose job it was to sweep snow from steps that asked to be forgotten. She walked with her shoulders back as if waiting to be struck and stubborn in her decision, not to bow to the shadow. Jon found her one late morning on the practice ground moving a wooden blade through the air until it had changed the air's mind about where it wanted to be. Who taught you that? He asked. My brother, she said, and a cousin who did not understand he was stronger than me, and so made me stronger without knowing it. Good cousins are rare, Jon said. I have no good cousins left, she said evenly. I have what I have. What you have is your name, Jon said. And you're right. The Watch does not deal in such trade. I do. I will be careful not to use you to buy what needs buying. If I ask you to spend anything, I will tell you what. She looked at him then, for the full weight of a moment, and weighed whether to believe him entirely or not at all. She nodded once. There was a tale my nurse told me, she said. It was about a Stark who found a girl frozen standing, with her hair full of snow, and her eyes full of it too, and a red thread around her finger. He took her to Winterfell and put her by a fire, and the thread started to smoke, and when it burned she cried as if a thing had been pulled out of her. He asked her what it was, and she said, My promise. He asked what promise, and she said, I cannot say it now that it is gone. He said, Then you are free. And she said, No, now I am nothing. When I am nothing. When I was little, I thought the story foolish. Now I think it wise. I will not cut any thread I can still see. Bah. Nor will I, Jon said. He wanted to tell her that not all threads are red, that some are invisible until you break them and bleed anyway. He let it be. He was not her nurse. If he had expected the days after the king's departure to be quieter, he was wrong in ways the gods enjoy. The pink letter's echo came back in small uglinesses. Men found with their faces swollen from winter's hand, which was not wind but men who had used hands in the wrong place to make a point. A raven loosed that never reached the place it was meant to roost, and appeared instead in the yard, with a slash across its breast, as if some hawk had failed to make a full meal of it, and left it hard to mend. A whisper passed that the Stard of Bolton, a Phryne's in black, as well as in pink and Nunnel Neve. Jon met it all with that habit of stillness he had fashioned for himself, the way a man fashions a tool that fits his hand better than any bought one. When Janos Slynt spoke at table, he did so with a smile that never included his eyes, and with a courtesy that was a bag with a stone in it. He had been on the wall long enough to learn the names of the men it would benefit him to pretend to respect, and long enough to learn which men would find a reason to like him given time and meet. Jon listened and learned nothing new. Slynt was a petty man made powerful once, and now trying to rehearse that power in his mouth when his hand could not reach it. That was a dangerous play. The petty could be tireless because pettiness was its own fire. Othel Yarwick was a different sort. He had the carpenter's patience with wood, and the impatience with things that were not wood. He wanted boards and numbers and men to hold boards steady, and a day without letters that did not say anything about timber. Jon gave him what he asked for, and watched him square something at the south gate, with a pleasure as clean as soap. Bowen Marsh hovered. He did it with dignity, and with the look of a man who feels a toothache, and rejects the idea of going to the man with the pliers. When Jon stood alone outside the armory one evening, the air a glass in the throat, Bowen came and stood beside him without speaking for the space of a psalm. The men murmur, Bowen said at last. They do, Jon said. They think you mean to lead them south, Bowen said. I do not, Jon said. They think you mean to let wildlings through the gate, Bowen said, making the word wildlings as fat with contempt as he could without making himself obvious. I mean to keep the Watch alive, Jon said. That may involve a bargain with men who do not care for our words, and who we do not care for in turn. If the others are to be kept at bay, they will require meat this side of the wall to eat that is not ours. Bowen blew his breath out in a slow, pained hiss. You lengthen the night in your talk, he said. I lengthen the day by the inch it can be lengthened by. Jon replied. If any man knows how to make a foot out of an inch, tell me his name and I will write him a letter too. Do not be clever with me, Bowen said softly. You were a boy saddled with striding into a hall not yours. You became a man with a sword because the world demanded cutting. Swords are not pens. Use each for its thing. I am trying, Jon said. It is like learning to lift with my legs. I do not know what that means, Bowen said crossly, which was a relief. Before dawn on a morning that had the taste of iron filings, the horns blew twice, and men came running like thoughts that had been put off too long and now rushed to be had. Not enemies out of the white. Not the king returned. Not yet. A small party in furs that had seen worse winters than this one stumbled through the gate with the look of men who had never thought they'd see the inside of anything again. One fell on his face and began to weep without sound. Another laughed and could not stop. Not because anything was funny, but because the muscle had decided to occupy itself. At the center of them was a man with hair like dirty straw, and a beard like a thicket that had small leaves caught in it, and a face that had been handsome once in a tricky way, and was now merely a geography of poor choices and hard time. He had a woman's hand clamped in his, and the woman had the look of someone whose body would soon inform her that it had done too much, and would do no more unless she lay down at once. "There's no harm in me," the man said, which is what men say when they know there is. "I am Theon of House Greyjoy." The name was a thrown stone. It hit every ear and bounced hard. Joan's hand went to Ghost's ruff, and Ghost's body tightened like a bow being drawn. Theon Greyjoy had sat at Winterfell's tables. He had ridden in their yards. He had smirked and made Ned Stark's rules into jests. He had betrayed and burned and mocked the burned by calling what remained Winterfell. "Ay," Theon said, seeing it all pass over faces like weather. "I am that. I am also what I am now. A broken dog with pieces of himself missing, and a girl he calls sister because he has learned, too late, how to be loyal to something. I have a name for you too. Ramsay Ball. He is winter wearing a man's face. He is not as clever as he thinks, and more cruel than he can abide living with, if given light enough to see himself by. If you are Jon Snow of Winterfell, you can hang me today, or you can hear me, and hang me tomorrow. Or you can keep me because I know things and can be made to say them. Either way, let the girl sit down." "Bem?" The girl's hair was brown and matted with old sweat. Her eyes were wary and not hopeful, which made them kinder than hope. She had a satchel clutched under her cloak as if a life were in it. And perhaps there was. There was a smell around them both that was not only travel, but something of old fear turned to a crust. "It is not Arya," Melisandre's voice said from somewhere beyond the interesting thickening of the yard. "The pink letter tells truth by accident when it tells lies about her. I have seen the girl with the needle in far places. This one breathes differently." Theon turned his head toward the voice and flinched as if it struck. "I do not know who Arya is beyond a word used to make men move where the bastard wanted them," he said, honest because it cost him. "I know a girl called Jean who was taken and called another thing because it suited a house tale. I know a marriage that was an animal act with no priest weeping over it. I know a boy on the wall who was cut of his pride and made to do worse. I know all this because I watched myself watch it, and the watching made me into a shape that was useful to a man like him." Jon stepped forward before the yard could decide what it wanted to do in one voice. He put his hand up, and men who had not been commanded by him stepped back, as if they had. "Bring them to the warm," he said. The words produced a sudden meaningless laughter in Theon that stopped with his breath and began again. "Bring them," Jon repeated. There is a tone that finds men's feet even when their minds are full of tides. It is not authority. It is an agreement, made not in words. He used it without liking it. When the worst of the heat had softened the edges of their shaking, and a bowl had been put into the girl's hands, and she had dragged bread through it with a concentration that moved Jon more powerfully than tears would have, Theon looked at Jon as if a boy looked through a man's face. "I was a lordling once," he said. "I am now a thing that remembers shame better than names. I will tell you where men sleep in Winterfell you have forgotten to look for. I will tell you where the bastard keeps his pride. I will tell you how to take his pride from him. I have nothing else to sell, and I have brought you a bride who is not the bride men think. If a maester wrote it, he would call it a correction. If a singer sang it, he would call it a correction. If a singer sang it, he would call it—" "She is not my anything," Jon said. The denial came out iron. "She is a girl under my roof. That is all, and enough." "Oh, it will not be enough," Theon said dully. "Nothing is enough with that one. You must bring a thing larger than enough." Ghost settled beside Jon's chair, red eyes on the girl's hands as if to judge her measure by the way she held food. The girl's hands shook less now. She looked up once and met the wolf's eyes with something like gratitude. which was strange and right both. After, in the quiet that follows the sort of arrival that becomes a story even as it is happening, Jon found Sam in the place where Sam was most himself. At a table with a book that could not save him and would, nevertheless, be what did. "I never expected to have Theon Greyjoy in our hall," Sam said faintly. "I remember him laughing at a thing Pip said that was not funny. I remember him looking at girls the way a man looks at a hunt he has no permission to join. I do not know what to do with this Theon. He is both and neither. We will use him as he asks," Jon said. "We will not pretend to ourselves that there is any goodness in that. That is how men begin to like their devices. That is how they ruin themselves." Sam's hand turned a page with care as if it might splinter. "You think yourself already ruined," he said unexpectedly. "You are not. You are merely covered in ash from other men's fires. It comes off with water and with time if you do not lie down in the embers each night to sleep." "When did you learn to talk that way?" Jon asked, a smile in it that was gentle where most smiles were made to defend. Sam blushed in the way he always had, a whole-face affair that made warmth in a room that had none to spare. "Maester Aemon told me to," he said. "He said a man can either say what needs saying and trust to the gods to forgive him the parts that he's wrong about, or he can say nothing and be forgiven by men for having said nothing. He said the gods never respected men for silence." Aemon's breath had become more delicate, like a thing spun in glass. He slept more than he woke now, and when he woke, he was like a candle inside a lantern. Present, useful, and always in danger of being breathed out. Jon went to him in the night hours, and held his hand, and listened to the old man's heart, trying to keep the measures it had set for itself, long before winters like this one. "Have you decided what you are?" Aemon asked without opening his eyes. "No," Jon said. "I have decided only to be what I must until I must not. That is as much as any man ought to," Aemon said. "When I was young, I thought titles were nets that caught men and were meant to catch them. Now I think they are only names for work being done in a given season. In summer a man is called harvester, and no one thinks him false to his true name, because he does not answer to it when he is in the field with a scythe. Let the warden be a word you answer to when the work is that. Let the watch be the word when the watch be the work." "Bowen would not agree," Jon said. "Bowen will be dead soon," Aemon said with the hard cruelty that comes to the very old like a clarity. "He will die full of stew and rectitude, and the knowledge that he did not let himself be used. He will be beloved by men who are also dead. I prefer men who live." Jon swallowed laughter like a child who has learned that it is impolite to show it. He stroked the old hand once with his thumb, and sat until Aemon slept with his mouth a little open like a boy's. He dreamed then, not in the bed but with his head against the chair's back and ghost's warmth at his knees. A dream that was not a gift and not a theft. He walked through Winterfell with snow falling as if it had opinions. The stones remembered his weight and were not sure whether to like it. He went into the godswood, and the face in the tree looked not like the one at the wall, but like another older face, with a fracture in it where a limb had been cut, and the sap had bled once and then had gone hard. He put his hand on the bark, and it was as cold as a sword left on a sill overnight, and he said, not with his mouth, "I am coming," and the tree said nothing because trees are not interested in men's warnings. When he woke, his mouth was dry, and the room had the faint smell of resin, as if a pine had breathed there and gone. The snow seemed to approve of plans made in it. The king sent back one raven with a line that was not more than 6 words, and made the men who carried it stand taller to have borne a thing that did not look like a burden. "Deep woods soon. Carhold waits." The run of that sentence had winter in it. Short, imperative, honest. Men read it twice, and then liked it for being what it was, instead of what it might have pretended to be to make them feel better. From White Harbor there came nothing else, and then, in the dark turn of a day, a second hamper with shortbread in it, and a tiny boat carved of pale wood too thin to be useful. It had a sail made of paper and a word written upon it that could be read from either side if a man loved palindromes. Loyal Dadiol. Davos held it in his palm and said, "Ah." as if a joke had been played upon him, and he appreciated the hand. From Carhold came two things. One was a letter in a hand neat enough to be taught, and careful enough to have been rewritten twice before being sent. It said, "Your Grace," as if the writer had not yet decided whether the grace belonged only to the man he was writing to, or to the act of writing itself. It offered men, and followed the offer with a list of the small pains the writer would like to see imposed upon his enemies, which was the sign of an uncle. The other was a man with his nose broken in two places, and his left ear missing, who had a scrap sewn into the lining of his glove, with a name John had written there. "He says to say, Arnulf eats alone," the man said, teeth chattering. "Not from cold, but from a fever coming on. He says to say the boy does not drink from any cup he has not washed himself. He says to say you should make a marriage happen with a man who has learned how to hold a pot without burning his hand." Ace sat with her fists in her lap, like two stones, and a look on her face that had no room for girlishness in it. "He speaks in half words," she said. "He cannot name me, because if the letter's read, he will have his eyes put out for speaking my name to another man. Arnulf is that sort." "You said a thread," John said. "I see it," Alice said. "I will not cut it, but neither will I let him tie it to something that will pull me from my feet." "Then we can be quicker," John said, and felt something in him glad to have a breath that felt like action. There is a boy in the village south of the long lake with a priest's learning and a mason's hands. He knows the words and understands the work. He can make a wedding with a word and a wall with the same care. We can bring a man to meet him at the appointed stone. We can call him husband and make soldier out of him by naming him so. We can do all this without asking Arnulf whether he likes the color of the bride's hair. Then she. Ace did not smile. She did not cry. She looked like winter when it approves of a man's idea, and will allow him to live long enough to attempt it. "Who?" she said, and her voice did not hold hope. It held a readiness to act. John thought of men who could hold pots. He thought of Sigorn, Magnar of the Thens, with his quiet pride and his hard hands and his tribe behind him like a cliff. He thought of the wall of habit between men south and men north of the wall. He thought of his vow in Stannis Road, and the little girl with a satchel who had been given a stolen name because it was convenient. It will anger men who want to be angry. Sam said afterward, grave in the way he was when his mind had already done the sums, and did not like the product but acknowledged it as true. "It will save Alice from being a sheep. It will give the Thens a tie and a table. It will give the watch a headache." "A headache is not a death," John said. "We have had both. I prefer one. Bowen will tell you that one leads to the other." Sam said. "He always does. He is not always wrong." "Then how? I will not have a girl dragged south by men who think the only law is kin," John said. "I will not have a man from beyond the wall told he cannot be anything but what he has been. I will not let the bastard of Bolton use marriages as chains while I swear to honor and say nothing. The oath I took does not forbid me to undo knots tied by others with dirty hands. It happened quickly because there is a way in winter that the things meant to be done can be done quickly, or not at all." The priest was fetched in a cloak too big for him, his glasses fogging with the transition from warm indoor to cold out, and a boy carrying his book as if it were the spirit of the thing he would make. Sigurd came with two men and said nothing until he was asked to, then said yes as if a whole valley had said it for him. A stood like a bare branch that had learned to sing and put her hand in the Thens, without coquetry. The words were said. The thread she would not cut was tied to a different post. When it smoked, it did so in a way she expected, and she held her hand to the heat of it without flinching. Afterward she said, because she was a Karstark and certain forms pleased her, "My lord," and Sigurd smiled without showing teeth. "Lady," he answered, with an accent that made the words sound like something carved from fur. Melisandre watched. She did not smile. "This is not the marriage the fire spoke of," she said, "and it is better than the one it did." Bowen Marsh shook his head slowly as if trying to eject water from his ears. "You have made of this place a court, he said to Jon, into his ear as if speaking to a boy who had wandered where he should not. "You have turned a black cloak into a judge's robe. I have given a girl what the watch can give in this hour," Jon said. "Shelter and law. If I must be punished for that, I will be. But I will not be shamed by it." "You mistake me," Bowen said harshly. "Shame is for men who know they have done wrong. You are proud of it. It is worse. Pride makes men deaf to small voices. You will not hear in time." "Then shout," Jon said, and walked away because he had learned that some arguments ripen badly if tended. When the wedding had been eaten, and the awkwardnesses turned into laughter, because bread and meat and ale had their way of making even mismatched pieces lie down together in a man's stomach, Jon sat alone near the door of the hall and let the warmth of the fires be a wall in itself. He had the letter to Ramsay under his hand. He had the map with Davos' little ink patch folded where the fold did not cross the ink. He had a small wooden boat in his pocket, because the Onion Knight had slipped it there with a grin and said, "Keep it. It will remind you that men like Wyman send jokes instead of armies until they choose not to." Ghost stirred. The wolf's ears tilted in that way that meant sound walked where men had not yet decided to notice it. Jon stood without any part of him, thinking too, and opened the door to the white and the quiet. He heard it then. The very faint, very far-lost horn of a rider sounding once, and then twice. Not alarm, not yet, but the punctuation men use when breath is a poor messenger, and sound must be given a tool. The men at the gate froze for a moment, like deer who have to remember that the rustle in the thicket is not the wind, and then moved, and the next minutes were a press, a shoving together of bodies and wills, as the gate opened and men made a narrow path, as careful with their fear as a woman with a child on a too steep stair. The rider that brought this message had frost in his beard the size of peas and a patch of his cheek, black with cold bite, and a look like iron under all that. He did not fall. He dismounted with a precision that told of a man who refuses to be found wanting by the world. He thrust out his hand with a roll of leather, sealed with a smear of soot. "From the king," he said, his teeth clicking together on the last word. "He says if any lord thinks it is summer, he will teach him the winter." Jon slit the leather and took out the parchment within. It was not long. Stannis had not found poetry on the road south. He had found what men find when they move over land that prefers not to be moved over. Karhold declares walls for the crown and doors for the foe. I eat Arnulf's bread and count the holes in his cheese. The young heir is alive and watched. A girl went to you. Good. Deepwood will be taken. Bolton sends no banner to meet me. He would rather have a guest than a host. I will come to him with my own meat. Have the North ready to believe me. Stannis thought. There were other marks. Numbers where the king had broken his force into parts in his mind. A small sketch of a ridge where men had slipped and another where they had not. A place where Davos had added watch here for holes in his rounder hand, and then an accusation that the ridge ran longer than the mapmakers had ever acknowledged, which was the sort of truth maps cannot bear. It felt like a hand gripping his shoulder from 100 miles away. It felt like a hand asking him not to look away. He did not. He read it again, and then again. And then he looked up into the faces of the men around him, who were hungry for good news in the way men are when any news will do. "The king stands," he said. "Karhold has not broken law in its own house yet. Deepwood will be reclaimed. The Bolton house has not come out of its shell. It will be pried open." He did not make it more. He did not dare make the day ask more of itself than it could pay for. He wrote replies with ink that felt like melted iron. He sent food where he could justify doing it by a line written last summer in a ledger. No one remembered writing. He sent men with the Theon-shaped knowledge to places in Winterfell that no longer held boys' secrets, but would hold a knife. He let himself think for a moment like a Stannis. If not, therefore. He let himself think for a longer moment like Eddard Stark. Right, wrong, then what is possible within right enough to break wrong? He went to see the girl called Jane in the quiet part of the evening where a man can sit at a woman's bedside without having to explain himself to any or to himself. She slept with her hands curled under her cheek like a child's. The satchel was under the pallet where she could reach it. He did not touch it. He did not touch her. He sat, and Ghost lay in the doorway. A white guardedness that said more than any words that no hand would pass that threshold without his say. "Why?" Theon asked from the bench by the wall, voice a worn rope. "Why protect her? She is a lie. She is a lie made into a girl, until she became the lie better than she was the girl. Why bother to make her into anything else?" "What?" "Because men used her to make a point," Jon said, without turning. "I have few points I can make in this world that do not hurt someone who does not deserve hurting. I will not add to that tally where I can subtract from it." Theon laughed once, and then again until it became a cough that racked him like the sea. "You speak like a man who has never had the world call him its dog," he said when he had breath. "I envy you more than I hate you. I am too tired to hate you. If you hang me, do it soon. If you keep me, give me work. I cannot be only the memory of my own failure. Men will make a song of it otherwise, and I would not give them the tune." "Now, I will give you a thing," Jon said. "You will not like it. You will take a bath." Theon made a sound that might have been a sob masquerading as a scoff. "That is the worst punishment I have had in days," he said. "I will bear it. I might drown." He did not drown. He came out with his hair blacker, and his beard less like a thicket, and his skin showing the palimpsest of hurts that had been written upon him. He looked less like a villain, and more like a man returned from a shipwreck. It did not make his crimes less. It made his humanity more difficult to ignore, which was perhaps a cruelty. On a morning like needle glass, when the sun appeared as if it had been offered on a platter, and then removed again by a disappointed servant, Jon climbed the wall alone, save for Ghost. He went to the very edge and looked north where the world went to the end of sight, and then went on. He thought, as he had thought a child, and as he had thought a man, that something was moving there under the white like a whale under ice. He knew better than to name it. He stood until his teeth hurt, and his eyes watered, and then he turned, and went down to the land of men and letters, and stew. The work made the days bearable. He spoke to men about walls, and to women about bread, and to boys about the way a sword is heavier. When a man is tired, he heard 3 petitions from men who wanted a thief whipped and listened to the thief, and did not whip him. Because the thing he had stolen to keep a child alive, and because men who had lost hands for stealing had gone on to steal again. Men who had been made ashamed with mercy sometimes learned thrift instead. He passed a judgment that made Bowen go very still, and then, because it had been it, went to the Godswood and told the face there what he had done. He did not know if it approved. He did not require approval. He required only that the world continue to hold steady under his feet long enough to make the next thing not worse. When the raven came with a strip of parchment that said only 3 words, written in Stannis' hand so bluntly it might have been carved into bark, he read it and let himself smile in a way that frightened Sam and made Ed say, "Oh, good, now we'll all die. Deepwood is ours." That night, a sledge of fish came from the men who lived in teeth-chattering huts by the lake, brought with a pride that had little to do with the fish and much to do with being part of a story larger than the winter of their own hunger. Men ate with the appetite of men told they may not starve. A song began in the corner, where songs begin without asking permission. It was about trees that do not mind the cold and men who think they do. It was not a good song. It was theirs. He slept near dawn and dreamed again, not of Winterfell, but of the space between. He walked through a stand of birches whose bark had peeled in long, papery curls, and made himself read in them a language that did not quite exist. Ghost ranged and then came back and ranged again, and once looked at him with blood on his mouth that did not belong to any deer. Jon knelt and took the wolf's face in his hands and said, "What?" Like a man asking a priest for a sin to be named, and the wolf's breath smelled like the sort of cold that is older than men. He woke with his hands empty and his throat sore. The day began again, as days do, simply because the world is stubborn. A boy ran with a message. A woman came to ask for more wood for a room, where a baby coughed like a tiny old man, and kept doing it. A man from Mole's town offered word of men in strange hoods seen south, not raiders, not lost, Not the kinsmen, not men he recognized. Jon took the words and laid them in a line on the table, and made of them a shape that could be a threat, and could be a rumor, and could be a test. He did not forget the bastard's letter. He did not forget the last sentence of his reply, which had been the only one he allowed to taste of challenge. Ramsay would have read it with his lip curled, and his hand on a whip that was not near enough to Jon to satisfy him. Jon did not let that warmth carry him away. He let it keep his fingers from numbing. When, days later, there came with the raven's stir a small, odd bundle of feathers tied with a ribbon like a joke, and within it a note in a hand he recognized not at all. Wyman's clerk. He guessed by the fussy loops. That said simply, "The merman's court sits harder than it seems. Ask for wages and bring a spoon." He laughed without wanting to, and then passed the paper to Davos' empty place, and felt a pang as if the onion. He had not. He was gone to do the work a man does, when a letter will not. He walked, later, to the inner yard with Theon, and let the broken lordling watch men moving under honest burdens. Theon stared at them, as if they were a memory he had mislaid, and was startled to see made flesh again. "I thought I had lost the way men look when they work," he said. "I have been around men who only hurt or were hurt. I had nearly convinced myself there was nothing else. And then you set a man to mending a hinge, and I find myself weeping without reason." "There is reason," Jon said. "It is only not elegant enough for a song." "I do not like songs anymore," Theon said. "They have too few verses about washing and about hunger." "Then you are ready to be of use," Jon said. "Men who hate songs are sometimes the best at making prose." The world narrowed again to iron and fire and breath. Men died, under blankets in the night and under work in the day, quietly and with much fuss. Babies were born, too few. Ghosts killed once a thing that had come near to the wall that had too many joints and not enough warmth to be alive. Jon would not let the men who had to carry it name it. Melisandre burned 7 little offerings of straw and fat and a handful of ash that she said were this and that. Jon let her, because men needed to see someone making of fear a ritual. He kept his own ritual to himself. 3 deep breaths at the southern wall of the yard. A hand laid once on the stone. The words in his head like the click of a latch. "I will not fail. I will not be false. I will not fall to the flatteries of despair." Then came a day wet with thaw, thin, treacherous. The snow did not fall. It slumped. The sky was a rag wrung out. The air smelled of iron and old sweat, and the underlayer of the world where decay waits. Men were edgy with it. Ghost whined once, soft, as if to say nothing in particular, and so everything. The horns blew. Once, twice, then thrice. Enemies. Men went to their places because there was nowhere else to go. Jon felt the old clean thing rise in him that had nothing to do with letters. The part that made the world shrink to a blade in his hand, and the 10 feet beyond it, and the men at his right and left. He cut through the yard with Ghost like a knife through cloth. Not because it was easy, but because what resists is often easier to part than what sags. But it was not a host from the trees with pink flayed men on their banner. It was not raiders in horned furs from beyond. It was not any of the things the horn announces in songs. It was a small, compact knot of men in gray, cloaks rimed with old ice and eyes that had learned to see at distances. Their banner was a paling horse upon dirty cloth. "You ride hard for men who like to stand still," Jon said when they had been brought under the gate's spite and allowed to keep their skin for a while. "State yourself." The foremost lifted his hood and let the wet fall across a face, assembled by a careful father, out of parts that had not been meant to fit, and did. Nevertheless, because of stubbornness, his jaw was a statement. "I am Sir Hother Umber," he said. "They call me Horsebane. I would not have them, but I have little else." "Last hearth wrote," Jon said. "They promised axes and appetites. I take both. What else do you bring?" "Besundar." "A message," Horsebane said. He glanced at Theon Greyjoy with the sort of deliberate slowness. A man gives a thing he wants to see changed by looking at it. Theon did not flinch. He seemed to shrink without moving. A letter that could not be written. A man who cannot be trusted. A chance. Jon flicked his eyes to the men behind the knight. There were 4, each with a way of standing that suggested long patience or long disappointment. One held under his cloak a bundle like a child, and breathed as if he were killing time, instead of standing in a yard full of men with their hands near steel. "Say it," Jon said. Horsebane shrugged once, the movement a landslide. "We'll not write down that my lord is alive, and we'd not write down that he's lost his sword hand, and we'd certainly not write down that he's being kept as a pet within Winterfell's walls. We will not write down that we plan to open one gate on a night of thaw, to let a few men in and a few men out again. We will not write that there's a little girl inside who is not a little girl because the world made her older, and that she will run faster than any of us because she has been running all year. We will not write it, but we will say it where ears are unsafe, and breathe on it, and then walk away. There are moments when the world gives a man the shape of the next week all at once. Jon saw it then. The thaw that would take the gossip out of ice. The gate that would stick and then give. The men who would die. The man with one hand. The gray girl running with a face that had not smiled in so long it might break, if forced to. The failure possible like a great white hand sweeping men off a board. He saw the Watch's quiet rage if he took a step south himself. He saw Bowen's mouth tightening into the shape of a drawn string. He saw Stannis on a ridge, counting his men. He saw Ramsay at a window, idle as a cat watching birds. "Not a letter," Jon said. "A word." He touched Ghost's head once with 2 fingers, and the wolf hummed low in his chest, like a forge under a heel of iron. "We will not write it. We will say it, and then be done with saying and make of our mouths only for breathing." They made a shape of a plan that could be outrun by luck, and ruined by betrayal, and saved by the sort of attention to ordinary obstacles that men who sing about battles never recount. Where the ice thins, how many men a staircase will carry. How much a hinge squeals. Whether a man with one hand can climb as well as he hopes. Theon spoke when he had to, and was silent when he did not. Horsebane glowered. The others looked at their feet when the plan reached places they understood, and at Jon when it did not. It was ugly. It was possible. He did not take the Watch's black into it. He took men who knew how to move without being seen, and who were not of the Watch. Men Stannis had left because their tempers were wrong for a road. He took Ghost and Theon and Horsebane Umber, and the one with the bundle that was not a child, rope, oil, a hook, the 1,000 small items that turn a risk into a likelihood. He told Bowen Marsh nothing that could be told, and that was almost nothing, because to tell him would have been to give him a chance to do what he saw as right, and the time for that was not now. A day would come when Jon would want to have this argument and lose it, or win it openly, and bear the price of either. This was not that day. He stood at the gate, in the wet dark, and felt the water find the crease of his collar. He put his hand to Ghost's neck. The wolf's fur was damp and thick. "I am doing a thing a lord would do," he said. "Not to the wolf only. And I am a man of the Watch. It will not be forgiven. It will not be forgotten. It must be done." "Then?" Ghost did not answer in any way a man could relate later. He pressed his body into Jon's leg, a solid comfort that did not require philosophy, and then he went first into the world beyond the wall where the timber holds water like a drunk holds promise. They moved with the thaw mark on their boots and in their mouths. The forest did its sound, the dripping, the occasional distant crack like a tree's knuckle. The sudden small movements of things that had been still for months and resented being asked to be otherwise. The men behind him breathed like horses at the end of a hard field. Theon had a way of putting his feet that betrayed a memory of being taught properly, and of having it beaten out of him, and of trying to relearn it without a teacher. When Winterfell rose out of the low, as if it had been planted in the soil and watered by old wars, Jon's throat closed. He had not known until then how much he had been keeping it open against this sight. The walls were changed. The stones were the same. He thought absurdly of scars on a man's face. How they did not make it a different face, only a face with a different story. The keep was lit here and there where men believed themselves safe, or where they wanted to declare that belief like a defiance. The godswood within was a blacker darkness. He felt his own godswood on his skin like a fever. "Where?" he breathed. Theon put his head very slightly to the side as if listening to a music only he could hear. "The kitchen postern," he said. "There's a hinge there that did not get oil in autumn as it should, and will squeal unless the man who moves it lifts it a hair. I showed Ramsay the trick once because I thought to make him like me by giving him a small power. I will use that now to make him suffer a small loss." "Good," Horsebane said, as if men traded only in even measures. "If a man must be a goat, let him have horns. It went as things go when men plan them. Wrong in the places they had not guessed, and right in the places they had. The hinge squealed little enough to be part of the thaw. The stone steps were slicker than the memory. The rope bit a palm and left it bleeding. A girl ran that hall, not the girl with needle water in her lungs, but the girl who had learned to put her feet where fear would not catch them. They did not meet her. That was not for this night. This night, the bundle with the rope and hook became a line a man with one hand could climb and descend. This night, Theon became useful, and Horsebane performed a delicate act of strength like a man carrying his own dead brother, without letting himself see the face. This night men went in and came out again, and did not all die for it. They stopped when the wall of noise a castle makes in its sleep had a new note in it. A question asked too loudly by someone who did not even know he was asking it. They froze, and then flowed again. Joan's heart did its machine work in his chest, and he put his hand to it once, as if to remind it of the rhythm. Ghost was where he needed to be each time a man looked where men look and saw nothing. When it was over in the way things are over only in the telling and not in the living of them. They were in the trees again with a man among them who had lost a hand and had learned a different balance. And Theon Greyjoy had a look on his face as of a problem finally solved after years of the wrong maths. And Ghost had blood on his snout that was anyone's, and Jon realized he had not breathed in any way that counted for the last 10 minutes and made his lungs expand until it hurt to make up for it. The man with one hand looked at him, and in his eyes Jon saw not gratitude and not joy, but a simple, exhausted assent. "I am your man," the man said. He had to be coaxed to say his name, not because he had forgotten it, but because he had put it aside to keep it safe. "I am Lord Manderley's guest," he added, and then grinned through the fatigue when he heard the absurdity in it. "No, I am Greyjoy's heir. But I am not he. You may call me Smulgen no more." "Harrion," Theon said, and put his head down as if a weight he had carried had fallen off. "Harrion Karstark is not with us," he added bleakly, "because men destroy joy in their mouths in the very moment it is born." "No," the one-handed man said. "I am Robert Glover," he said, a little annoyed now at the confusion, which was healthy. "You can call me a fool, but not the wrong name." "I will answer to fool. I have done enough to earn it." They laughed then, quietly and with iron edges. The laugh of men who are alive when they might not have been, and are not yet ready to make that mean too much. They made for the wall. They left behind them a castle that had felt a small pinch, and would now rouse itself to examine its skin with ill grace. When they were within the gate, and men who had not known whether they would ever see these men again saw them, there was a sound not much like a cheer, and not much like prayer, but bearing some weight of both. Bowen Marsh came almost at a run, stopped himself from it, made it into a trudge, and then stopped altogether at the sight of Theon Greyjoy among the returning, and of Robert Glover without a hand, and of the fact of Jon's presence among them. "You have done it," Bowen said, in the tone men use when they cannot decide whether a thing is a crime or a miracle. "You have done it." "I have," Jon said. He did not add what, because the declaration would have made of it the wrong thing. He leaned his shoulder to the gatepost for a moment, feeling the world's weight there. Ghost sat and put his head on his paws, and closed his eyes, and the red behind them glowed through the lid still, like banked coals. "You do not understand," Bowen said. "You do not understand what you have done." "Yes," Jon said, and looked at him full. "I do, and I will answer for it." "Memory." He slept then, late and badly, and woke with the shape of Winterfell stones under his feet, and with the knowledge that small victories make enemies as much as large ones. He expected the pink letter's second installment, heavy with boasting about how gates squeal and girls run and men with one hand can be lost and won like dice. It did not come. Instead came a sign on the road, reported by a rider, that men had hung men in the square at Winterfell with a placard that said treason and another that said stupidity, and the bastard had laughed at both as if they were different jokes to please different parts of himself. He wrote to Stannis with a brevity that would not waste the king's patience. He wrote to White Harbor with a line that said only, "Deep wood is ours and something dear to you is nearer." He wrote to the Umbers and to the Mormonts with a fiercer hand, and to Lady Dustin with one that made even her have to set the paper aside and walk to the window. When he went again to sit with Maester Aemon, the old man took his hand and put it upon his chest and said, with a very small smile, "I lie still." "You do," Jon said, feeling the fluttering there like a bird that will not be caged and will not yet fly. "Do the thing you must," Aemon said. "Men will kill you for it. Men will bless you for it. The gods will not speak. You will be alone with your choice and with me. Here, a little while longer to say things in your ear that you will mistake for wisdom. That is what old men are for." Jon bowed his head until his brow lay against the blanket, and for one breath allowed himself to be a boy in a winter he did not know how to end. Then he rose because men were standing outside his door with news. The news was a man with a thick neck and a face like a heel of bread left in the pan too long. He had with him 3 boys, not men, not yet, and a fat wife who looked as if she had been drugged from her bed by her hair. He looked at Jon without love, and without the intelligence to hide his lack of it. "You are the Warden," he said with the same tone as a man says. "You are the thief. You made a marriage no man wanted but you, and you took a man from a winter castle, and now there's an emptiness there the cold will fill with corpses. What will you do now, Lord Snow who thinks himself Stark?" Jon let the words live in the air. He did not argue with them. He said, "I will feed your boys if you will work. I will not feed you if you do not. I will break the hand of any man who touches any woman in any corner on any night without her having chosen it. I will hang a man for less than that in winter. Go from my yard if you cannot live under it." Then the man opened his mouth to make a sound like a cow's. Then he closed it because his wife's eyes were on him and because Ghost had stood up and because the boys were not boys if they had to see their father shamed. He went. The wife did not. She went to Gilly and said, a minute later, in a voice that had gratitude in it, like a nail bent into the right shape, "Thank you." Jon stood alone in the yard where the snow had begun again, in large, confident flakes. He looked south. He looked north. He felt the wall behind his back and the invisible lines from his letters running like strings tied to his fingers. He lifted one hand and did not move the strings. He let them hold him where he was for now. He thought of Stannis on a ridge that should not be where it was, and of Davos at a table where meat and wit were cut with the same knives, and of Melisandre's eyes, reflecting not him but her god, and of Bowen's mouth, with its thin resentment, and of Ed's humor, and Sam's book, and Aemon's heartbeat, and Ghost's nose, cold with news. He thought of Winterfell's stone, and of a weirwood face that said nothing, and of Arya somewhere far with needle air in her chest, and of Sansa somewhere nearer with coin light in her hair, and blade wisdom in her smile. He thought of Aelys Karstark's thread smoking, and of Sigorn's hand that did not flinch, and of Theon's laughter when told to bathe. He could not say whether the day was winning or losing. He could only say it was holding. He would hold it with it. He set his shoulders and breathed in winter, and let his breath go slow and steady as if to teach the day its own pace.